I remember my late father used to buy his cassettes, and we listened to them. I also was we were lucky to be living near record studios, and each time his albums were released as young children, then we would rush to the recording stores, who were always playing the songs so that they could attract people who buy the albums from them. So we would listen firsthand to the music. So I began to take interest in him. And as at the time I went into my research, I never knew some of those fault lines, of Ayinla Omo Wura. But in the course of the research, I found out that brilliant musician, deep musician, he had an authorial understanding of issues that had to do with African traditional religion, metaphysics, language, culture. However, the fault lines could also not be abandoned. He was a very violent man. And he believed so much in traditional African medicine, which was prevalent at that time of the Nigerian or the Yoruba society. And he was also, of course, he had so many wives, and of course, so many children. And so I just wanted to paint the totality of his picture. I wanted my readers to also learn some lessons about his fall. He was a superstar, so to speak, who, as I said earlier, was a very brilliant musician. As at that time, you could, in that Yoruba genre of music, you could hardly point at 3 musicians who could unbuckle his sandals. Maybe you talk about people like Haruna Ishola, who he also deferred to at some point, where he sang, Ninu ilere agbaye patao Ishola mo fi eju.
At some point.
At some point. Because initially, they were also on a war path. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, some people also attributed the reason why he had to succumb to the prowess, so to speak, of Haruna Ishola. They said it was metaphysical, that he had attempted, to fight him metaphysically, but found out that the man was stronger than him, that it wasn't strictly about music, it was a metaphysical dueling. So he was also fighting virtually everybody. He was fighting Oluwonyo. Oluwonyo was a younger musical colleague of his. He was fighting Ayinde Barrister. He was fighting Ajakpe. Was fighting so many other musicians of the time. And so I started off with the intention of reconfiguring who Ayinla Omo Wura was.
He was unlettered.
He was unlettered.
How come he became that brilliant?
Yes, I think it was, I've forgotten I think it was, what's the name of this Dada Kwada musician from Ilorin, who said, Moti Mogbon Ori mi be mi na kawe o. Meaning that I may not be lettered, but I am also, I have wisdom. And that if you place being lettered side by side native wisdom, you should pick native wisdom. Ayinla Omo Wura was highly imbued with native wisdom. In his songs, you will see alliteration in literature, you see metaphor, you see wide usage of symphony in music and synchrony. His songs synchronize, the lyrics synchronize, and at the end of the day, even though when he attempted to speak English, there were areas where he attempted to speak English. You see a man who was down there in terms of being lettered. However, the knowledge that oozed out of his songs, you cannot put them down. For instance, there was a place where he was saying, Agbenka shuton daloko koko nkara emo iya yin fe suru gunyanri awon baba yin fe suru gunyanri. He was saying that, look, the farmer, after he was checking his barn, his harvest, and had yams, a collection of yams, and then cocoyam, tiny cocoyam, was attempting to say that they wanted to muzzle the big, yam. That did your forefathers, have they ever used, we call it a suru. It's a kind of yam. What's the name of it?
Cocoyam.
It's not cocoyam.
Okay, bitter yam.
Bitter yam.
Yeah.
That have your forefathers used bitter yam? Have they pounded yam with bitter yam before? You could see depth. And in virtually all the songs of Ayinla Omo Wura.
Now that brings us to this point. What is really education? If an unlettered man could be philosophical in his music, and lettered men borrowed from the proverbs is lyrical consciousness.
Yes, lyrical consciousness.
What is education?
Exactly. And in fact, if you take your time to listen to Ayinla Omo Wura, you will know that you agree with the song I sang earlier, which says that, look, native wisdom, of course, if you have native wisdom, you'll be philosophical. Your outlook, your understanding of the world will be deeper than merely going to school. When you read, several times I've written journal articles from most of the songs of Ayinla Omo Wura. There was a particular one I wrote where he was talking about, where he said that Ẹ̀sìn alátọ̀sí kò sí lọ́wọ́ òkóbó. And so I began to break that statement down. I mean, he was saying that, look, if you place a man who is impotent side by side somebody who had been infected with gonorrhea, at some point, the two of them, the society frowned at the two afflictions. Somebody was impotent and somebody who also had an affliction of gonorrhea. He now said, look, the man who is impotent cannot mock the man who has gonorrhea, because it is because the man was virile. That was why he could have gonorrhea. But you, who was impotent, who was not virile, and the remedy to your lack of virility was not inside. So you cannot afford to abuse the man or scorn the man who had gonorrhea. So you had, such huge philosophies, folklore, which you can harvest from Ayinla Omo Wura's music.
So can we conclude now that he was educated?
I think he was educated. I wouldn't say he wasn't educated.
Because for a researcher like Dr. Adedayo to say, I want to research on this man,
yes,
that speaks volume.
He was a phenomenon. He was not only a musical phenomenon. There were, for instance, now people have said, why didn't you, for instance, research on somebody like Fatai Olowonyo? Fatai Olowonyo's lyrics were very danceable. He was also singing Apala. And he was the first person, if I can remember, who infused guitar into Apala. Very danceable. He was also but you couldn't compare the depth of knowledge on parade in Ayinla Omo Wura to any other musician of his time. And that perhaps is why he was the only, at least for now, musician of that period who we have had people do research into their lives. It's because he was phenomenal.
And in your book, you give detailed account of the emergence of Apala music on the scene.
Exactly.
You said here, the particular founders and proponents of Apala music are in various form of contestations. What are you trying to say?
Yes, among them there was intense rivalry. I told you about Aruna Ishola. You had
you mentioned names like Muraino Alaoye,
yes,
Ajao
Oru,
Kasumu Adio, Sefiu,
Ayon.
Ligali, Mukaiba,
yes, Ligali,
Ajadi, Lorin.
Yeah, exactly. So there were many, and there was contestation. You also had Ajakwe, he was a major rival for Ayinla Omo Wura, who lived in Abeokuta. So that's why you could pardon Ayinla Omo Wura's recourse to metaphysics, because all of them were seeking superiority, musical superiority, and in the process, it was said that they also had to, seek metaphysical reinforcement of their music.
Why?
Because they needed to. It was, of course, it's the same question you asked. There was rivalry at that time between King Sunny Ade and Ebenezer Obey. In Shakara, Yusuf Olatunji, Esa Kababa Waidi, right there in Abeokuta.